guys, welcome back to another Bible video. We're going to talk about Romans because I just finished that about a week ago. There isn't quite as much to cover as there in this one as there is in Jeremiah. It's funnily enough, the first chapter or two of Romans was giving me Jeremiah vibes because it's talking again about where is it at? God's judgment, and chapter 1 verse 25, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator who is forever praised. And so there's just those little different verses scattered that are out there that just gave me the Jeremiah vibe, which is very pleasant. It was a very pleasant surprise to go into Romans and be like, I'm getting the same vibes as Jeremiah. It was very nice, actually. But yeah, we're gonna try and go through this a little bit quicker than I did Jeremiah. It's a little bit shorter, I believe, which will help. I don't think there's as many rants I need to get into because I didn't make insane notes about different things this time around. So we're just going to go through, find the verses. If a rant comes out of it, cool. Here we go. In the first six chapters, the point it really seems to be getting at is the idea of the relationship between faith and works, and obviously assuring us faith is what saves you. We're justified by faith. Chapter 3 verse 28, for we maintain that a person is justified by faith apart from the works of the law, but going through the importance of the works and just in talking about how God's grace and God's mercy is shown all the more when it overcomes these great sins. When we hear these stories of people who come out of these horrible lives where they were living in sin and they were living in all of these horrible dark things, and then God comes into their lives and saves them from that. It's an incredible story, and it just shows God's grace all the more. And then bringing up the problem then with that some Christians fell into, and then chapter 6 verse 1 and 2, what shall we say then? Shall we go on sinning so that grace may increase? By no means. We are those who have died to sin. How can we live in it any longer? And covering that problem of, yes, God has abundant grace for us, unlimited grace for us, but that doesn't mean we are just given a free card to just go and do whatever we want. We, having accepted Christ, are now meant to live free of that sin and to live in a life of light and of life now, instead of the darkness and death that we came from. And we increase grace by bringing it to the people who still are in darkness, rather than sinning ourselves and just sitting and repenting. Because at that point, you're not truly repenting. You're just saying, I'm sorry, and then going back into your life, which is not repentance. It's just an empty apology. And so it's very cool, and it's very in-depth, and there's so many verses about it. But it just goes on and on. One I will point out in chapter 5, just because I loved the whole back and forth with this, and the parallels that it made between the Gospels and Genesis. It's in chapter 5, and it's the whole section is chapter 12 through chapter 21, and the title is Death Through Adam, Life Through Christ, and drawing the contrast and yet also parallel between the two of them. So it's a little repetitive in what it's saying, but says it in a different way, and I like how all the different ways it says it. So the main one that kind of sums up the section, I think, is the second half of chapter 5 verse 16. The judgment followed one sin and brought condemnation, but the gift followed many trespasses and brought justification. And the whole idea behind that is, or I guess, yeah, idea behind that is Adam sinned. The first, one man sinned, and through that, everyone was cursed following that one sin. And then Christ comes, and through that one sacrifice and through that one gift of grace, all are then justified. So long as they come to him, obviously, but like, despite all of the years of sin that happened and would happen, he covered all of that with one gift of grace and justified every single person if they so choose. And it's just this crazy, wonderful parallel that I absolutely loved reading. Like, I absolutely love that entire section. It's just so good I love the way the Bible intertwines and it parallels and it uses meanings of names and it draws and it calls back to different parts, even from way in the beginning of the Bible. It's so good. I think I mentioned this a little bit, but like through 6 and 7, chapter 6 and 7 especially, it's talking a lot about you are dead to sin, you are no longer a slave to sin. Why do you live this way? And bringing in, it's like, no, what you give your obedience to is what you are a slave to. So you are slaves to sin when you live in sin, but when you live in Christ, you are, and it's a hard word that I feel like people push back against it because of the connotations of the word, but you are a slave to Christ, you are a slave to righteousness, and there's so many negative connotations with that word. I feel like people take it wrongly, but it really is just, this is what you give your obedience to. This is your master. Essentially, without all the context, like the context people have and all the connotations that people have from history, the bare sense of your master is what you give your obedience to. A slave is someone who obeys something. So everyone is a slave to something, and it's just a matter of what you are giving that obedience to and giving your, in a sense, freedom, but not exactly. Because there is freedom in Christ, and it's different from what the world views as freedom. So if we're talking in the worldly sense, giving your freedom to. But in a spiritual sense, you're not giving up your freedom, you're seizing it. Also a rant that it was a whole sermon at church last week. So that's also on my brain. I don't remember enough to do it justice. So, and then, in chapter 7, it has a whole conversation about, at the end of it, the last half, it's talking about how, hey, we're not under the law anymore because of grace. We use grace as our justification, not the law, and kind of talking about a little bit the obsolescence of the law at this point with the grace that Christ brought. And then it goes into it and says, is the law sinful then? Is the law then no longer a righteous thing? And throughout this last section, starting, no, the law is not sinful, but sin has warped it and used it to bring people into sin. It's verse 11. For sin seized the opportunity afforded by the commandment, seizing the opportunity afforded by the commandment, deceived me, and through the commandment put me to death. So sin took advantage of the law and the legalism that we place on it because of like the importance that the law is. So actions, whatever, for in more modern terms for us, it takes the importance that we put on these actions and these works, and it uses it to twist this good action into something that becomes sinful, because then we are looking more at the work than we are at pleasing God, and it turns into this warped, twisted version of what it's supposed to be. And it's so interesting to see how he lays that out and talks about it, It's like the law is not sinful. It's the way that sin has taken this opportunity of people, developing that legalism, and seized this opportunity and turned this law, this beautiful thing that God gave the people, into something that is no longer righteous. It's, and there's Romans 8, which I feel like there are so many things in Romans 8, but honestly, forget Romans 8. I feel like I underlined more things in Romans 11 or 10. I think it was 10. I underlined more things in 10. I underlined half of chapter 10 and not quite half of chapter 8. But chapter 8 is more, I think, gets into the hope and the gospel side of it, and talking about Christ and his love for us. It has the whole we are more than conquerors through him who loved us, and that whole section talking about neither height nor depth nor angels or demons nor anything, the present or the future, nor any power, height or depth or anything else in creation can separate us from God's love. That's probably not in order. I was even looking at it. And gets into really the hope that we have in Christ. And it has the whole, we are adopted as children of God. So chapter 8, verse 14, for those who are led by the Spirit of God are the children of God. And we'll just go to 17, I believe. We'll go to 17. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship, and by him we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit himself testifies with your spirit that we are God's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs, heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, if indeed we share in his suffering, in order that we may also share in his glory. And so this is really the hope chapter of Romans, and I think that's why it's the one people focus on, because it goes through the hope and the love of Christ and of God. And so that's the main theme of that entire chapter. And so that's probably why it's so popular. But I personally get more out of, at least now, of the other chapters and seeing the deeper things that he then talks about. We get chapter 9, which gets more into, this is not, it leads into chapter 10 as well, because they're kind of interconnected as one section. But it gets into the sovereignty of God, and we cannot save ourselves. This is why actions are useless. Who are we compared to God? Who are we to even talk back to God? Like chapter 9, verse 20. But who are you, a human being, to talk back to God? Shall what is formed by the one who formed it say to the one who formed it, why did you make me like this? We'll do verse 21 too. Does not the potter have the right to make out of the same lump of clay as some pottery for special purposes and some for common use? And it gets into God is sovereign, God has control over it, and getting into all of the kind of the inferiority of humanity, because by comparison to God, we are inferior. Actually, no, the chat, I missed the section split, so then I get into a little bit of a different topic. And getting into righteousness by faith versus righteousness by the law, and how the Gentiles are then brought into this. Not just the Israelites, not just the Jews. It's not just for you, it's for everyone who has faith. So chapter 10, 12, and we'll do 13 as well. For there is no difference between Jew and Gentile. The same Lord is Lord of all and richly blesses all who call on him. For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. And then getting a little bit too in that passage into the responsibility then of us as Christians to tell them, because how are they supposed to call on him? How are they supposed to know to call on him if no one tells them? Romans is wonderful, and I should really read the rest of that, but I'm going in a very weird order through the Bible. I'm just sort of flipping and going, that book looks interesting, and reading through it. So yeah. it's interesting, but they've tied together in like kind of cool ways so far. So I'm not going to fix what isn't broken. But a fun verse at the end of chapter 12, the last one, verse 21. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And just the reminder not to stoop to the level of people who are like lashing out in rage or whatever other sinful thing. Don't stoop to their level to try and reach, don't drop to their level to reach them. Instead, meet them where they're at, obviously, but not. Okay, it's interesting because it's like we don't want to be on the same level of them as far as where they're at in life, but we still want to meet them where they're at and reach for them. It's almost like, this is a random analogy, but they're down on the ground, you're up in the helicopter, you're getting saved from whatever disaster is happening on the ground. We, see this person down in the darkness, drop the ladder, and instead of just like hoping they grab onto it and climb up, we go down the ladder and we reach for them. So we're getting down to their level, but not stooping to their level. I think that made sense. Let me know if it didn't. Just the don't stoop to their level, don't lash out at someone because they lashed out at you, or act out in anger because someone is following the world's view versus God's view. That's not going to help anything. It's just going to make them mad at you, and then therefore at Christianity, and further in turn get pushed further away from God. So that's meeting evil with evil is not going to stop evil. It's just going to increase it. So we need to overcome evil by holding fast to God and holding fast to our faith and doing good. Chapter 13, just a cool verse in verse 8. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. The idea that love fulfills the law, it doesn't take away from it, it fulfills it. And it's so cool because you see it, because that jumps back to Jesus when he said, I have not come to like abolish the, I don't remember exactly how he phrased it, but I think he says throughout, within the Gospels, something similar to this, where he's like, I'm not here to abolish the law. I'm here to fulfill the law. And because he fulfills the law, he creates a new covenant with us through grace. And so now we love others and fulfill the law the same way Jesus did. Ooh, chapter 14. Gosh, I'm down with chapter 14. We'll just do, because it's talking about how we interact with other believers who are at different levels of us than us, who have then different traditions, I guess, surrounding their faith versus us. And how we handle that. So chapter 14, we'll do verse 1 through 3 for starters. Accept the one whose faith is weak without quarreling over disputable matters. One person's faith allows them to eat anything, but another whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. The one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one who does not, and the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted them. So keeping in mind that while the details of their belief are different than ours, because they're at a different level, they're like, no, I can't, or like they're at a different level, or they're in a different situation, a different place where they're like, I can't do like alcohol or something. It is our job to remember God accepts both of us, even though we don't have an issue with alcohol and they do, which I'm the non-alcohol person in the situation. I personally just, it's not necessarily a faith-based, it's evil thing, but I personally am just like, I don't do alcohol. So taking that example, it's like the person who can drink alcohol can't look at that person and be like, why not? You're weird. and judge them for that. And in the same way, the person who doesn't drink alcohol can't look at the one who does and be like, you're an alcoholic, you're going to hell, this is awful. We have to accommodate each other. And in especially extreme situations where this is a huge thing for someone, taking that accommodation to the level of I'm confusing myself. But the person who does drink alcohol then choosing not to do so in the presence of the one who doesn't do alcohol, for the sake of not forming some sort of obstacle or some sort of obstacle for them to have to figure out and navigate. Because our job is not to prove we're better than other Christians or prove we're right to other Christians. Our job within the big C church is to accommodate each other, to love each other, to provide for each other, and to, in this situation where one person can and one person can't, when you interact with a person who can't, make sure you don't either. Because if they believe they can't or believe that it's wrong, you're not helping anyone by going to that person, and for one, arguing with them, obviously, but doing that thing that they see as a negative in front of them is not helpful to anyone. It just creates chaos, and it creates discord within people who are meant to be united. So us as Christians are meant to accommodate each other within our differences. Because yes, we are all different, and that is a good thing. God made us all different, and he accepts all of us within all our different, sometimes because of all our differences, because he made us the way that we are. So it's just a very good conversation, especially in, I think, today's day and age, because the church is so discordant with each other, with all the different denominations and all the ways that it splits and all of the crazy things. Like, if they're doing something unbiblical, yes, stand up to them, confront them about that. But if it is not unbiblical, and it is just a different variation of the belief that we both share, why does it matter if they worship God in a slightly different way? They are still Christians. They are still his children. We need to accept them and accommodate them within these differences. That's the last big thing that I had underlined. I really liked Romans, and it's probably underlined more than the Gospels. There's just so many things in there that are very integral to our beliefs as Christians, and they should just be common sense, but sometimes, especially here and now, they just aren't. So it's been so cool to read the Bible this way. Like, I have struggled with reading the Bible so much for the entirety of my lifetime, and recently started this whole trend of picking a book of the Bible, reading through it, and it's been so good, and it's been so cool getting all the context for the information, at least within the book. I haven't gone full theology, break it apart yet, but just seeing the connections then as I read through entire books, as I just read the little footnotes that are in there for extra information, for meanings of words, for how different versions translate it. It's so cool. And I love this way of reading the Bible. For at least this season of life, it has been so helpful, and it has been so cool to experience the Bible in this way, even if I'm not necessarily reading it in order or in any kind of sequence. I'm just picking a book. It's been so good, and I've gotten so much out of it. So yeah, there is my Bible rant for the month. I guess this has almost become a monthly thing. I hope you've enjoyed. Please discuss more in the comments. What things have you found from Romans? Do you want me to share more specific verses that I found interesting? I just would love to discuss this with you in the comments, and just nerd out about the Bible and Jesus. It's becoming one of my favorites. So yeah, those are all the things I have to discuss. Obviously, again, please continue discussing in the comments. I post videos on this channel currently every Saturday. Life is nuts. I don't know when I will get back to, when or if I will get back to a second video. But I am back to posting on my audiobook channel on Thursdays. I'll see you guys next time.